Hey everyone, I'm Dane Cohen with Management One, and I am very honored to be joined by the one, the only, the Godfather of Retail, Paul Erickson. Paul, how are you?
I'm very good, Dane. It's great to be with you today. And that introduction you gave me is was exactly the way I wrote it down for you to say. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, I gotta ask, where did that come from? The Godfather of Retail. That's a pretty big designation. What's the origin story?
Well, I believe it was first coined by Ashley Alderson at the Boutique Hub. I was introduced. I was a keynote at their summit for the past several years, and I think when on my first keynote, I think she called me the Godfather. And then in the second year, when I came out on stage, they played the Godfather music, and so that just it took wings from that point on.
Well, it has stuck. It has stuck. We love that. And we love our friends over at the Boutique Hub. So shout out to Ashley and thank you for sticking us all with that nickname that will forever live in fame and infamy. All right, so Paul, we're going to jump in. And today we're going to talk about all things independent retail. We're going to talk a little bit about our own lives, what we're seeing amongst our clients, what's going on in the general retail space, and give some insights and opinions. So I'm going to kick off, and I just want to do a little recap. You know, we're coming into the spring season now, and March is here. But we got to spend some time together in February. You know, we had a lovely Valentine's Day together at Magic in Vegas.
We did. Thank you for the roses. I
You,
appreciated that.
of
Yeah.
course, you know, as anyone in the retail world knows, that Valentine's Day, you're out of commission. That's it. You're in Vegas.
Right. That's exactly right. And they changed the dates because of the Super Bowl this year also. So,
Right.
that was
We had a big year this year. So listen, it was a big show for Management One. I had a great time. I thought it was, it's been so great, every time we go to one of these live events. And I think that the biggest thing for me, and I know that you agree, because I hear you're a people person, just the word on the street, but the biggest thing for me is that we get to speak with retailers. We're on Zooms and we're on calls and we're constantly connecting with retailers, but when you're with them in market, I think you just get such a pulse of what's happening out there.
I completely agree with you. And some people say that Magic isn't as important as it was. It's been diluted, of course, Dana. I know you want to talk a little bit about that. There's Magic Nashville, and there's Magic New York and Magic Miami. There were still 25,000 attendees at that show last month in February. And between the educational events, the networking opportunities, and the amount of companies that retailers can go see and at Project, at Sourcing, at Magic, it's still a very, very important show. And we did get the opportunity to speak with a lot of independent retailers. And I think it's changed, but it hasn't changed in some ways. I think that the thing that we hear, and Dane, by the way, your presentations were awesome. Both of them were fantastic, and we had overflow crowds, by the way, in both presentations. But the one thing we hear from retailers after your presentations is, and I remember this one lady came up to you and said, "My boss is giving me an edict." Is edict the right word? I'm not sure, but he is giving.
We'll go with it.
My boss is giving me an edict that I have to find planning and demand forecasting software for the company, because right now we feel like we're flying blind. And what she said was, after she heard your presentation, she needed to look no further. And that's what I hear a lot from the perspective of retailers is, how can I be smarter and more intelligent when I come to these markets, more prepared, better prepared on what
The
I should be looking
number,
for and what I should be spending.
the number one thing I hear from retailers, hands down, is I feel like I'm winging it.
Right. Right,
Right.
right. And there's an anxiety to that too. That's what they express to us, is the anxiety that they feel. I mean, if you think about this, let's say you're $1 million retailer, you do $1 million in sales, you are investing $500,000 a year roughly in merchandise. And so you come to these shows, you're spending in six figures your money on merchandise. You're investing, I should say, in merchandise, and it's 100, 150, $200,000 at a time. And is that money being spent correctly? And and am I doing it? Am I missing business? Am I overspending in other areas? And how can I be more efficient in how I invest my capital in inventory?
Well, could you imagine any other world, any other industry where you're investing $500,000 without a plan?
No,
It's
no,
unheard
I
of.
can't. Unheard of. Right. Exactly. And well, I think there is, though, this attitude that I have a plan, and typically their plan is that I essentially buy vendor. And if I like the vendor's line is stronger this season, I'll buy more. If it's not as strong, I'll buy less. And that is my plan. And I used to be a salesman in another life, and I know how it works, right? You're there, you sit down with a client, and you know how much they bought last season, and your boss is telling you, I want a 10% increase this season. And if you spend less with me, I'm going to immediately tell them that they're going to drive their store out of business because they don't have enough merchandise.
Oh yeah.
I want to make them feel guilty. And so they have this pressure on them. Retailers' whole lives are just surrounded by pressure, from the banks to the salespeople to their own staff to their spouses. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. And it can be a very, very stressful environment to own a store today.
Well, what's funny is actually, Paul, I didn't realize that you had that experience in your career as well. I was on the wholesale side as well, right? I know
Mm-hmm.
what it is to be on the other side of that booth.
Right.
And you're 100% right. My VP of sales would come down and say, if you don't sell this retailer 15% more year over year, that's coming out of your paycheck, right? And
Right.
so that pressure to have to, continue to move the line, continue to move it and grow your business within a retailer, the retailer has to remain in control of the situation. And the
It,
only way to remain in control, it's not by winging it. That's not going to get you very far. Or this idea of, I go with my gut, I trust my gut. You have to walk in there and be able to go toe to toe with that salesperson. Because listen, it's a partnership, right? Vendors, retailers, this is a partnership relationship. But at the end of the day, you are in charge of the finances and the profit of your retail business. You have to go in with your best interest in mind, with the best interest of your bottom line in mind, and the best interest of what is going to continue to grow and foster cash flow in your retail business. So the concept of walking into a market, a trade show, any type of vendor event, winging it, it's just not going to fly.
no, it's not. And you know, for those listening to this podcast, you'll be shocked when I say this, but I am considerably older than Dane. And I was in retail. I started out in retail in the 70s. This is what a fossil I am. And you think about all the changes in retail since the 1970s. There was no e-commerce. We did not have the competition that we have today. In my town of about 50,000 people that I grew up in, and I was the menswear buyer at the local department store, family owned, by the way. We didn't have any major store competition whatsoever. We were the store in town. And my budget that I used in the 70s was that I would go sit down with one of the reps, and he would bring out exactly, Dane, how much I bought a year ago. And he goes, okay, you spent $25,000 with me. Then we looked at the line and we started adding it up, and he expected the order to be placed, given him on that moment, by the way, because, at the time we were called musical buyers back in the day. And musical buyers meant that we took notes. And they didn't like that because hardly anybody took notes. Everybody gave the paper on the day, and it was better be more than the $25,000 or you're going to go back and review the line again. That was our budget. And in the 1970s, when we had much lower expenses and we were paying people $1.50 an hour in payroll and things like that on the floor, you could get away with that. You could get away with sloppiness. You could get, and it always seemed like I bought too much here and I had too many markdowns here, but we never even tracked those things. We basically bought merchandise, we brought it in and sold it. And wherever we ended up at the end of the season is where we ended up. and at the end of the year, wherever we ended up is where we ended up. And I'm quite sure the owner of the store, and back then this was like a $10 million business in the 70s. I'm quite sure the owner, when he got his financials back, we probably took a little peek at him and going, you know, oh God, I hope we made money. I hope we made money. There are far too many retailers in 2024 that operate their business in exactly that way.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea how much they should be spending on inventory or where and when to bring it in, and no idea about the concept of margin, no idea about the concept of turnover and return on investment. Financial merchandising is one of the least understood concepts in retailing. I have given presentations at colleges in the past. And I remember, can I tell you a quick story, Dane? We've got a half an hour.
Please, please indulge me.
So the University of Missouri has been a longtime client of Management One's. And I was there one day as just to sit in with, because I was the big shot coming in from headquarters, right? And I was going to come sit in because they were a very important client of ours. And as I was sitting in the conference room going over their reports for their bookstores, and they had, I think, 8 or 9 bookstores throughout the central Missouri region, a student comes in and goes, "Mr. Erickson?" I goes, "Yes." And he goes, "Your class will be ready for you in 5 minutes." And I go, "Excuse me?" And he goes, "Your class will be ready for you in 5 minutes." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Oh, didn't we tell you? We knew you were going to be in Columbia. And so the retail merchandising class are actually studying for this week." Now, there was a whole semester. They spent 1 week on financial merchandising. This week, we're discussing financial merchandising. And we knew you were in town, and we'd love you to come and address the class. I go, "I would love to." Like John Houseman in The Paper Chase, mine's full of mush. "I would love to come in and talk to them. How much time do I have? 5-10 minutes?" And he goes, "Oh, you have the whole hour and a half." But Dana, doesn't shock you, that was not a problem for me.
Not a
But what
problem
was
for
interesting was I spent an hour and a half talking about these concepts in a way that the students could understand. And I got such a positive reaction. And I asked the teacher, I go, "How much time do you spend in this class for a semester on financial merchandising?" And she said, "We have a week that we spend on it." 1 week on financial merchandising, which is, in my opinion, as important, if not more, than visual merchandising. It is such an important part of the business that is so poorly understood by retailers. And I'm not talking about small retailers. I'm talking about larger independent retailers as well.
Well, that's the most interesting thing, right? And we tend to, the most interesting thing about, speaking at Magic in particular is, some people would think that the retailers coming up at the end of the presentation are just starting out, just getting their feet wet, maybe thinking about opening in the store. But we speak with retailers after our presentations who have been in business for 20 plus years. These are legacy retailers. They're running multi-million-dollar businesses. And by all metrics, are successful, right? They're generating revenue, but they're not tuned in to the concepts that we're talking about revolving around the financial merchandising and cash flow of the business. So it's really interesting that this is not a overlooked concept by just the newbie retailers or people just starting out. You can be running a successful, high revenue generating business and still be missing those. It's kind of in the nooks and crannies of the business. It's in the fine tuning of your category structure where you can really start seeing, whoa, I've been underbuying this class for years. You're telling me that I've been turning this way slower than the average benchmark of other retailers, or something as simple as you've been holding this much inventory in a category that's not even producing that much cash back to you. And once you start to open the door to this and peel back the layers, right? It's shocking what retailers discover about their own business, even in multi-million dollars and what would be viewed as highly successful retail establishments.
One of my daughters, I spent I won't tell you which one. $250,000 sending her to college in a 4-year degree, $250,000. And you see parents do this all over the country, investing into their children's education. And it can be a meaningful amount depending on where they go to school. And why do they do that? Why did I do that? Why do parents invest in an education for their kids? Because they want their children to have a better life. And it has been proven that if they're better educated, you will be more successful in life. You'll be more successful in business. You'll be more successful in whatever endeavor you want to do, because education is such a key to everything, except sometimes when it comes to retail. For some reason, this doesn't seem for many retailers as important. Let me tell you one more story. So this was in the 90s, and I was working with a chain of shoe stores on the East Coast. And at that time, they were purchased by Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett, because Warren Buffett bought his company, Berkshire Hathaway, bought their parent company, which was H.H. Brown Shoes in Vermont, I think. And so their parent company was bought by Berkshire Hathaway. So I called the president up about a couple of weeks after that happened. And I said, hey, have you been to Omaha? Have you met Warren Buffett yet? You know, that type of thing. And he said, no, but we had a team from Omaha here in Baltimore last week, and they ripped up my bonus plan I had for the buyers right in front of me. He goes, they literally took it and ripped it up in front of me. And I go, I'm thinking to myself, what kind of stupid bonus plan did this guy have, right? You know, for this to happen. And I said, so what was the bonus plan? He goes, oh, well, we were paying our buyers and managers a percentage of the gross margin dollar increases that they produce year after year. So if you had a store that the sales, the gross margin dollars were up $50,000, they probably paid the manager 3-4%, whatever bonus, whatever that number was. And that was how everybody got bonus, based on gross profit dollars. And I'm thinking,
I know what you're thinking.
yes, I'm thinking, well, that's part of the story. And of course, for Warren Buffett, who is maybe considered one of the greatest investors of all time, the team from Omaha said, well, we don't pay our people this way. We don't pay our people based on just simply profitability. We pay our people based on return on the investment to profitability. And what was missing in that company, and this is what a lot of retailers miss, and this is why they don't get ahead, they don't succeed as well as they can, is what was missing is analyzing the amount of investment that took to create those profits. If you increase your profits by $50,000, but theoretically you spent $10 million, you had $10 million more in inventory sitting there, was that worth bonusing?
How much inventory is sitting on the floor in the stock rooms? How much did you need to get that extra profit? Exactly.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, and I mean, if your sales are up 10%, but your ending inventory is up 25%, you know, do you still bonus the manager? And this is why they tore up the plant. This is the part of business that I think, you know, retailers don't really appreciate. When we talk about merchandise planning and forecasting and all of that, we think budgeting. And budgeting is important. It's a big part of what we do. If you have a business that doesn't, let's just use $1 million, and you want 50% profit at the end of it, you're going to buy, this is open to buy 101 day. This is your first day in class for people who are not familiar with inventory budgeting. If you want a 50% gross profit, you do $1 million in sales, you buy $500,000 worth of merchandise. Period. That's your budget. Now, you may mark that merchandise up to 1.2 million on your initial markup, which means you have $200,000 in markdown budget. But you are going to buy $500,000. But that is only part of the story. There's another part of this story as well, which is how much inventory you are holding. It's an accounting word. How much holding inventory do you have? And that is absolutely critical to the success, because you have to know, it's the Goldilocks formula. Porridge is too hot, too cold. If you hold too much, you tie up capital. You end up maybe not being able to pay down debt. Your inventory doesn't turn fast, which means it's become aged and old, and people don't come into the store as often because they see the same things. You have too little inventory. You turn it too fast. You have missed sales, and you have missed profitability. So getting that function right of how much inventory, everybody knows how much inventory you have right now, but very few retailers that we talk to know exactly where they want to be in terms of investment in July, or where they want to be at the end of December. That's the key number.
Well, and here's always the interesting way of thinking about it, right? Is that your merchandise to your accountant is all an asset, right? But we know as retailers, and any retailer knows that that product, that merchandise is a liability the longer it sits on your floor, right? There's a freshness
Right.
factor there. And so it's super important that, you know, when we start talking about these concepts, right, you can't just look at your paper profit. You're looking at the time it takes to sell, the right stock to sales ratio, how you're turning the goods. So, Paul, this is, you know, and this is what I find the most interesting about this topic, you know, financial merchandising, inventory planning. Let's be honest, it's not the sexiest topic to talk about, right?
No, it's
Yeah,
not.
we have at Magic, there's celebrities on stage. I think Martha Stewart, I don't know if it was this season or last season. You have Martha Stewart there. You have celebrities, influencers, social media, and yet people gravitate towards our presentations, which are on financial literacy, right? And it's so interesting to me because I think that's where people really feel that they have the most to learn. And I love that you talk about education because being a retailer, especially how quickly our industry changes, it's a constant evolving education process, but there are just some core principles that drive the fundamentals of building and growing a successful purchasing department and buying department that's going to drive the bottom line in your business.
You know, retailers go through employees all the time, and they go through buyers all the time. And I'm thinking of a client of ours in Houston, Texas, and she has several stores, and she just lost one of her buyers about 6 months ago because her buyer got pregnant and wanted to stay home and wanted to be a stay home at home mom. That's great, well, fantastic. She had to bring somebody new in. Those things change in her business, but what is the constant? The constant is that when she works with us, each new person that comes into the buying function for her business, she's a multi-million dollar business, is taught these principles because she can't even imagine running a business, like you said, Dane, by the seat of the pants, by winging it, I think is what your words were, because she can't afford to do that. She's got too much at stake. And so buyers come and go, but what stays is this relationship she has with Management One and the education that we give her and her people all the time.
Yeah, and I say this, I say this in earnest, right? And a lot of people come to me and you know, especially when we're talking through partnering together. And I always say this, my main concern is not that you're necessarily a client of Management One. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to partner with you. My main concern is that you start shifting focus to how you are financially merchandising and what your inventory plans are, right? And we like to joke that our biggest competitor is Excel, right? Because you know that's the kind of strategy that a lot of retailers take. They're doing these big pivot reports out of their POS into Excel. And listen, I think that's an incredible start in the right direction of thinking about your business from a profit-driven buying perspective. And what has really been the eye-opener for me, and as a former client of Management One, was that daily upload of data happening seamlessly between my POS, my point of sale,
Mm-hmm.
coming right into my inventory plan so that I can see, I talked about, I've been talking a lot about Abercrombie and how they rebounded in the last few years. And their biggest mission, their number one edict, it wasn't fancy marketing. It wasn't big ad campaigns. They didn't put all their money into hiring the biggest celebrity on a multi-million. You know where they put their money, Paul?
Blocking and tackling.
They put it into perfume ads, right? No, they put it into daily micro trend analysis so
Right.
that they can start seeing live data of what's selling in their business by location, by category, and they can start reacting. Actually, I don't like to use the word reacting. they can start responding to the business. That's their tremendous turnaround. That's all over the Wall Street Journal. The kind of hot topic. They're the darling of retailers right now. And they were literally, you couldn't even say the name Abercrombie 5 years ago.
Right.
And their biggest investment, their CFO just spoke to this, was in data driven metrics so that they can understand at a store level, at a category level, what's happening in the business. So, Paul, I got some hot topics I want to talk about before our conversation comes to a close.
Can I interrupt you though real quick, Dane, because I do want to just put an amendment on what you just said. And
Please.
because I think that when independent retailers hear what you said, which is 100% true, but I think they get frustrated because independent retailers don't really understand the data they should be looking at. And data has no value if it can't be turned into useful information. And for independent retailers, they have data. They do have data. They just don't know how to put it in a useful format that they can really, really use to help them grow their business. And it's there. It's all there for them if they just know where to look. And that's, I think, the data paradigm that exists for independent retailers. We've got the data. They agree with everything you said, but how do I make sense of it all to solve real practical problems in my business?
And then the second part of that is putting it into context, right? Because
Right.
you can look at some data and you can look at sales and go, my sales are up, everything's golden, right? But unless you start viewing it in context of the larger business, what you were speaking to before, your sales are up, but how much did you invest in order to get those sales?
We got a lead. We got a lead several years ago from a guy who had like 15 stores in Australia.
Yeah.
And so we had someone from our company who, somebody, an hourly employee, I don't know who it was, I'm not going to say names, but says, please send, this is the data we need. He sends the data. Everything he sent, it was like 20 pages long, Dane. And it was for every store in every classification. And I know you want to talk about classifications. In every store, in every classification, he sent detailed information on gross profit percentage. That was it. And I looked at it all and I go, there wasn't one that was less than 46% gross profit. And there wasn't one that was more than 48%. It was like they were all the same. And so what did it tell us? Nothing. It told us that gets back to the Warren Buffett thing. It's not how much money the profit is, it's how much investment you have. We didn't see the amount of inventory they had invested in those categories in each store and what return it did give us. Okay. I know you want to get to classifications, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. And this is, and thank you for that. And I just want to put a disclaimer on this, right? That, we talk about data and we use the data word a lot. And this is a hard topic, right? There's not many people that were formally trained as buyers and planners. And, a lot of us are homegrown retailers, right? We learn this in the field. So I just want to put a disclaimer on that. We know that this is a hard topic to talk about and a scary area of your business to start investigating. And this is, again, it runs the gamut. This is the new retailer that's just starting out, that's, just open, and it's the legacy retailer and sometimes big organizations. There are buyers in big organizations that may be great product selectors or great pickers or fantastic merchants that still have trouble analyzing data and getting the right information. Okay, let's go on to hot topics. So my hot topic, and this has been, it's funny how, things happen in groups, right? And in the last few months, I've been getting a lot of questions around, should I be planning my business? If I'm looking at my open to buy plans, if I'm looking at my future purchases, my future orders, should I be planning by category or by vendor? So Paul Erickson, I want your hot take on this hot topic.
Well, I am not going to say that it is never appropriate to plan by vendor, because I think there are certain verticals that are very vendor specific. I think the shoe industry is one of them. But I would say that what's important for all retailers to understand is that retailing is a business of recognizing customer shopping patterns. And it's important to know that these shopping patterns are consistent, they're cyclical, and because they're cyclical, therefore they are predictable. And the reason why we look at, as you say, category or classifications is that is the concept of how your customer looks at your business for the most part. Classification management is customer focused, and that is absolutely critical for every retailer to understand. A classification is a group or an assortment of merchandise that the customer finds is interchangeable. They define the structure themselves. They come and look for a sweater and they settle for shorts. No, I mean, that's not how it works. And if you have a classification called bottoms, the customer is not coming in and saying, hi, can I help you? And he goes, yeah, I'm looking something for my bottom. I mean, that's also not defined the way the customer looks. They're coming in, I'm looking for a pair of jeans, I'm looking for a skirt, etc. So it's customer oriented. And the other thing is, and this is why vendor analysis is important, but not in planning. Vendors are not permanent. When I was in the business back in the 70s and the 80s, and I wasn't even in the 80s, in the 70s, I don't know if any of the vendors that I carried are still in business today. Probably zero. In fact, if you look at 10 years ago, the hot vendors and what are hot today, it's completely changes. Fashion changes so quickly, and the vendor matrix changes all the time. It's almost impossible to plan by vendor. Now, you can have a budget by vendor, but that's based on those individual classifications. So let's talk about the permanence.
By the way, I
Real
just
quick.
want to give a great example of that, just to bring this home. And you mentioned shoe retailers, right? Which is a very brand driven business.
Right.
Could you imagine, probably 5 years ago, not, I would say 5 years ago, maybe 6, 7, you telling a sneaker retailer that there are going to be big contenders outside of Nike, Adidas, New Balance, that there's going to be a brand that comes along named Hoka, which is going to rock your industry, or there's going to be a brand on cloud that's just going to skyrocket, they would laugh in your face. And in fact, a lot of them did. A lot of them held their noses and, kind of looked away from that product, which are now billion-dollar powerhouses in that industry. So, I do want to talk about just one thing before we talk about the permanence, right? Is that one, when you plan by vendor, you are almost strangle holding your business to a capacity that may not actually exist. One of the things that I find retailers get wrong a lot is how important a vendor is to their business. Outside of, remember, we're seeing it right now with the Stanley water bottle craze, right? That's a phenomenon.
Right.
That is a phenomenon where someone is coming in and they want a Stanley water bottle and they will knock children over and they will, fight to the death to get that Stanley water bottle. That is a phenomenon. That is, that sits so outside of the norm of business. Or, now we're going really a lot of years back, the UGG phenomenon, right? People didn't just want a boot, you needed the UGG, right? It was the hottest thing going. Those fade, right? These are blips. They are phenomena that they're designed to be unpredictable and come out of nowhere. The majority of everything else, someone likes a pair of jeans and they have a vendor they like, they have a brand that they like, you could probably sell them another one if you don't have that brand, right?
Right.
A good salesperson can sell them out of that. So accept these kind of, wild trends that just, burn hot, burn fast, and come and go in a flash. Most people are, like you said, they're coming in and they need a dress for an event. They need a blazer for an interview, right? That's how a customer shops.
Right. And occasionally they will ask for the vendor, but those are relatively rare. I think about Levi 501 or things like that, that are absolutely, basic things like that they will come in and they'll only want a Levi jean. But for the most part, you're exactly right. And if you plan by vendor, if you are planning by vendor, you better be prepared to plan by vendor and by classification. So you better be if you talk to a typical store, they may work with 150 vendors. And let's say within the vendors, they have an average of 5 or 6 classifications. So you better be prepared to have 1,000 classifications to be updated, to be planned, to be looked at all the time. It's not manageable that way. It simply is not. It's not this. It's not bite size in terms of how you plan your business. And you're right. They're not permanent too. That's why we talk about the other thing besides vendor is when you want to plan, you create classifications that are not classifications but are attributes. And they have to be careful with that too, because if you take skirts, for example, women wore skirts 100 years ago, they wear skirts today, they'll wear skirts 100 years from now. They don't change. That's permanent. But what does change is maybe floral skirts or solid color skirts or skirts with dots, red skirts, wraps, pencil. You can go down that, and those things all are in constant flux based on fashion whims, but the skirts themselves don't change. And that's the way people, one last story. So and we'll talk about the shoe business, and I love shoe retailers, by the way.
Love our
And
shoe
and
dogs.
and I remember I was in a shoe store, and I was looking at, he had these men's penny loafers. This was quite a few years ago, and they all looked alike. They all looked like the same penny loafer. I go, how come you carry like the same essential penny loafer in like 4 different vendors? And he said, "Oh, Paul, you don't understand. They're completely different." And I go, "Really? They look the same to me." And essentially, he goes, "Well, this one, the stitching is a little bit different on this one, and the thread count or something." He had all industry insider information of why he wanted to differentiate these penny loafers. When the customer, I'm looking to buy a penny loafer. And so he was looking at it not from the customer's viewpoint, but from his own, inside baseball view of the business.
Yeah, and just to go back to your example on skirts, right? The difference between floral skirts, there's always trends within I love that, the difference between an attribute and a classification.
Right.
And this is exactly what defines a great merchant. A great merchant knows, right, when they're in market and they're seeing a trend, that is what a great merchant is there to do. They're there to find, hey, I am feeling really strong about floral skirts this season. I'm seeing an attribute. I'm seeing a trend happening in the market. I'm dedicating my budget that is, reserved for skirts. And I'm going to put a good majority of that into something I'm passionate about, I believe in. That's where your gut should be used, right? That's
Right.
where the gut comes in retail.
Right. Right. It seems like if they plan by vendor, you're almost then attached to that vendor.
Exactly.
You don't want to change because I have a plan for it. I have to buy. There's my budget, so I have to go buy. And it becomes a self-defeating process, I think. So
You're filling
anyway,
dollars just to fill it.
that's right. That's exactly right. So Dane, I think at one time you said you were worried if we could fill 30 minutes today.
Paul, I'm never worried about filling time with you. That is
Right.
between us two. We could
we can talk.
we can really rock and roll. So listen, I think we are in the spring season. There is a lot of activity. This is a busy time. I know for me back in my retail days, I looked forward to March. There was nothing more I loved than that fresh deliveries of spring goods. It was my most exciting time of the year. So we wish everyone some great sales, some healthy business this spring, and we'll be back very soon with our next update, our next conversation. We may even have some special guests. Paul, any last words?
No, this was great. I enjoyed it. I knew it was going to go over 30 minutes, by the way, because once the two of us get together, it's hard to get a word in edgewise. So be careful with who we invite as a guest with both of us doing this. So make sure he understands there's not going to be a lot of dead air time.
Buckle up. Buckle
All
up.
right. Sounds
All
great.
right. Paul Erickson, thank you as always.
All right. Bye-bye.